We're starting, while the kids come round, maybe, I don't know, Steve, whether we can do this, because we're going to dive into the Bible, and I would love it if we could have a bit more light. So, I don't know if we can put the house lights up or not. That would be fantastic. Oh, look, let there be light. Okay, and everyone's sort of blinking. Sorry about that. And as we start, for those who are watching online and for even those in the room, today's sermon notes, we have got printed copies here for those who would like printed copies, but you'll find the sermon notes on the YouVersion Bible app. If you go to the events section of that, that's the, oh yeah, you can even look at that. You can use the QR code to work it out. How about that? So encourage you to go there, and on the YouVersion Bible app you'll also find links to give us feedback, to join the newsletter list, and to give your tithes or offerings to online. The QR code is just there for decoration. So, but if you go to the events section of the YouVersion Bible app, which is the most popular Bible on any app store. It is the one that's free, and so you can download that on any app store and just go to the events section, and Citywide will pop up if you've got your location services turned on. We're diving into a new sermon series, and this sermon series is based on a question I first had as a 13-year-old. I was going to Sunday school, and I heard someone tell the story of the Emmaus Road at the end of the book of Luke. And in this story, Jesus has been resurrected, and he meets two disciples heading towards Emmaus, and they're a bit despondent because they had put all their hope in Jesus, and all of a sudden all their hopes are dashed. And he says to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Didn't the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in the scriptures concerning himself. In the Bible, when it says Moses and all the prophets, when it says Moses, it means the first 5 books. For Jewish people, they're attributed to Moses. They're Genesis through to Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy are attributed to Moses. They're the books of Moses, and then the prophets is the rest of kind of the Old Testament. And so what Jesus is saying, didn't you read your Old Testament? Didn't you see that it had to, I had to do all this, and this is what had to happen? And I remember thinking as a 13-year-old, no, I didn't see your name in the Old Testament, Jesus. Where is that? And so kind of at the back of my mind, ever since I went off to seminary and I've been reading the Bible, I've been fascinated to wrestle with, okay, it would have been nice to get some sort of recording of that teaching and see what Jesus was actually saying. But what we're going to do over the coming weeks is see if we can track the journey of the Old Testament and see if we can work out what Jesus might have been saying to those disciples. Because it is I think it's important for us to be able to see in the Old Testament why Jesus did what he did and how his death actually brings life. And we can start that journey in the very first chapter of the very first book, which is where we're going to start the journey. But up front, what we want to say is I believe that the Bible is the story that makes the best sense of life. The Bible is the story that makes the best sense of life. All of us live from a story. You may not be completely conscious of the story, but you live from a story that tells you the kind of person you are, the kind of person other people are, that tells you what to expect in your life, whether you're part of a tragedy or a comedy, whether you're here to, change the world or just take up space, whether you expect everybody to listen to you or expect nobody to listen to you. All of that comes, they reckon, for the first 5 years of your life, a lot of that gets embedded in who you are. But we all live from a story. And then as we get older, we align ourselves with different stories. And you have, certainly over the last couple of 100 years, we've created a whole lot of isms. And within Christianity, we've got quite a few, like creationism and there's Calvinism and Arminianism, and there's a whole lot of isms within Christianity, but also outside Christianity, you've got atheism and communism and socialism, and all these are stories that we try to explain reality with. And the assumption behind the Bible is it is the best story to explain reality. And so what it means is you can reality test it. Either the Bible leads you to hope and life or it doesn't. If the Bible doesn't lead you to hope and life, either you are misreading the Bible or the Bible's not true. So what we want to do is get into the Bible and see if we can understand this story that finds its culmination in Jesus. And we start with the very first chapter of the very first book. And just to say, within Christianity, you may or may not be familiar with this, is that these chapters of the Bible have caused some consternation amongst Christians over many years, trying to work out what does it all mean, how does all this work. I'm not going to get into all that, but I have this week posted a video by the guy, familiar with a thing called Veggie Tales? Phil Vischer, who's behind Veggie Tales, posted a video this week about Genesis, and I've really appreciated, and I've got in the sermon notes there the links to. He's quoting a guy called John Walton, who is a historian of the ancient Near East, and helps. He's written books called The Lost World of Adam and Eve and The Lost World of Genesis 1. And basically what his work shows is we're kind of fighting about the wrong things when it comes to Genesis. We're misreading Genesis. And I really encourage you, if you want to think more and be open to wrestling with it, I'd encourage you to read that or at least watch the video that Phil put up. But one of the overall things to understand is since the Enlightenment, we've been really fascinated with how things work. And so our central question for us is how. But the central question for people in the ancient Near East was not how, but why. And so the book of Genesis is a story that is laden with profound meaning. So much so that Martin Luther, the father of the Reformation, said there have been thousands and thousands of words written about Genesis, but no one's ever come close to capturing the full weight and depth of what Genesis actually means. And I don't think any of us will come close to fully understanding it. But there are two truths at the heart of the first 3 chapters of the Bible that I believe are essential and sort of set up the Christian worldview and help to make sense of the world in the way that a secular worldview doesn't. I believe that starting with the very first chapter of the Bible is a fundamental and beautiful truth that is true both for Judaism and Christianity. I actually had thought this was true for the Muslim faith as well, till the local head of the mosque corrected me on this. They don't believe that people are created in the image of God. The Muslim people, I had assumed they did. So I was corrected on that. But this is the very first chapter. There are actually, one of the things that John Walton has pointed out, there are a lot of other creation stories from around the time of Genesis, from other places in the ancient Near East. But what is unique about Genesis and the creation story we find in Genesis and the Jewish scriptures is this: that you are created in the image of God. All the other creation stories from the ancient Near East you are created as a servant for a God just to meet their needs. That you have no worth in and of your own right. But the Bible says right there in Genesis chapter 1, 26 and 27, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness. So God creates mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. That the incredible truth of our Bible is you are created in the image of God. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there are actually two creation stories in Genesis. There's Genesis chapter 1, and then in Genesis chapter 2, it tells the same story from a different angle, and it describes how God creates human beings. And what it says is God gets a bit of dirt, puts it together, and then what happens? He breathes on them. Did you know that in both Greek and Hebrew, the words for spirit and breath are interchangeable? One of the distinctives, I'm not convinced that this is the whole of what it means to be created in the image of God. I'm sure there's more to it than this. But what is clear is it's not less than this. One of the distinctives of being a human being created in the image of God is there is a human spirit. That is true of all people. That all people, no matter what they believe, are created in the image of God. And the book of Genesis, one of the things we actually have a discipleship course coming up called Foundations, where we drill into this much more deeply. And I really encourage you to come and be part of that because we don't have time to dig into this like we need to dig into it, because these are foundational truths. But one of the things we see in the first 3 chapters of the book of Genesis is that I know something about you. Because it's true of all human beings. You were created and you come alive when you're loving. Isn't that true? Isn't it true that you come alive when you love? Isn't it also true that you care about truth? That it's not a superficial thing when you have consciously chosen to misrepresent the truth, that there's something deep in you about that. There's also something profoundly important about having autonomy or responsibility. That if somebody crosses your boundaries and takes away your responsibility, that's profound. Similarly, when you've been avoiding tidying your room, not that you'd ever do that. Not that you'd ever do that. Or that your car gets a little bit messy. Not that that would ever happen. Can you notice it actually has an impact on you? It's not superficial. When you know you are avoiding responsibility, it has an impact on you. And the fourth thing that we see in those first few chapters is human beings were created to be creative. We all express creativity in different ways. Maggie is an artist and a singer, and I wish I could express creativity like that. But others of us, for me, often leadership is a creative thing, trying to work out how on earth do we make this work? How do we fit all these strange people together and get them to be productive together? That is a creative task. I also used to love computer programming. It was a creative task back in the day when you could have my VZ200 with its 8K of memory. I love that computer. Now I have anyway, that's a whole other story. I wonder for you how you express your creativity. Some people express it in the garden. I don't understand that, but Ray does. I can't imagine anything other than pure torture in the garden, but for some people it's a place of joy. I wonder for you how you express your creativity. Genesis teaches us that is who you are. As a human being, there's a spirit. There is a part of you bigger than time and space. The book of Ecclesiastes says, God has put eternity in the hearts of man. And Pascal said, you don't have to convince people intellectually that inside every person there is a part of them created in the image of God. Therefore, there's a part that is only filled by God. Augustine said, our heart is restless till it finds rest in you. So before we go too much further, one of the things, as I said at the start of this, I believe the Bible is the best story to make sense of your life. And so we want to reality test that theory. What I want to do is chuck up a Mentimeter. I'm hoping this QR code actually does work. Because one of the things we do is we seek input and we test this. And what I'd like you to do is honestly think about the times where you're being loving, truthful, creative, or responsible. Honestly think about them and describe how it feels. Let's chuck the slide up if we can. What does it feel like when you're being loving, honest, creative, or responsible? You can use your QR code to take you to the Mentimeter. And as we said, I think you can reality test the Bible. I think you can reality test the Bible. If you are in tune with what the Bible actually says, it is going to make sense of your life better than any other worldview. So we're going to test that theory right now. The Genesis says you were created to be loving, truthful, creative, and responsible. So we want to see, what does it feel like when that's true for you? Can you think of times where you know you're loving, when you're having integrity and standing for truth, where you know you're being responsible or you know you're being creative? Sometimes you're doing a few of those at one hit. Sometimes it's just one of them. I encourage you to name what is the felt experience of that? Do you want to chuck the slide back up just to make sure everybody and if you're at home, we'd love you to participate in this too. You can point your camera at your TV but if you're watching on the phone, that'll be a bit difficult. But you can go just to menti.com and use that code and you'll see the responses. Okay. So, let's see if we can start to see from us as we put this together, what does it feel like when we are being loving, truthful, creative, or responsible? Let's see if we can get some of these answers up on the screen. Isn't that interesting? Fulfilled, content, good, happy, freeing. We've had 41 responses so far. I believe all good theology should also be good therapy. Because if it's true you're created in the image of God, the closer you get to understanding God, the closer you should be getting to understand yourself. So Genesis teaches us we should be loving, honest, creative, and responsible. Loving, truthful, creative, and responsible. You know, the way word clouds work, the bigger things are said by numbers of people and then individuals are said by others. But you see the big ones: happy, peace, content, good, fulfilled, rewarding, satisfied, fulfilling. Okay. I encourage you to keep throwing in the answers, and for those who are using the app, you have a link to keep track of the results there, so you can see the results as they come in. Now, I've got a fairly obvious question for you. So why aren't you loving, truthful, responsible, and creative all the time? If that's what it produces, why don't you just do that all the time? Doesn't that make sense? Is there anybody here who would say, I'm always loving, always truthful, always creative, and always responsible? Probably good. Because you may not be completely in touch with reality if you were to say that. And so this is the other side of the biblical story that I think the secular worldview has no framework for. I think there is a secular worldview kind of says people are innately good. And from that perspective, you get the Russian Revolution, which we spoke about last week, where if there is evil in the world, it must be because there are evil people who are causing evil to happen. And Alexander Solzhenitsyn bought into that. And so they thought if we could just get rid of all the rich people, then all of a sudden everything would be good. And then when that didn't work, he ends up in Siberia and writes the Gulag Archipelago. I've got another quote from him today. As he points out, if only it was true, where is he? That there were evil people somewhere, insidiously committing evil deeds. And it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil isn't between people. It cuts through the middle of every human heart. And this is the biblical truth that makes the most sense of our lived reality. You see, there is a beautiful part of you that comes alive when you're being loving, truthful, creative, and responsible. But let's be honest, there's also a dark part of you that is full of yourself. And both of those things are true to who you are. You're not either or, you're both, is what Solzhenitsyn discovered and what the Bible has taught for thousands of years. We live in a complex world, and we live in a world, interestingly enough, where people have forgotten that, and they're trying to find hope in political systems and in getting rid of people who don't think like them. And so we are slipping into a world where people think the problem is the woke people, or the conservative people, or as we head to a state election, the Labor Party or the Liberal Party, we think that the problem is out there. And we keep getting surprised that it's in here. N.T. Wright is one of my favourite biblical scholars, and he says, despite Auschwitz and Buchenwald, despite Dostoevsky and Barth, people still continue to this day to suppose that the world is basically a good place and that its problems are more or less soluble by technology, education, development in the sense of westernization, and the application to more and more regions of Western democracy and, according to taste, of either Western social democratic ideals or Western capitalism, or indeed a mixture of both. This state of affairs has led to three things in particular which I see as characterizing the new problem of evil. First, we ignore evil when it doesn't hit us in the face. Second, we're surprised by evil when it does. And third, we react in immature and dangerous ways as a result. I think if you look at the world right now, I think you are seeing a world where people are being surprised by evil over and over and over again and trying to work out what do we do about that and defaulting back to we've got to get rid of these people because they're causing it. And it will never work because, you see, I know that there is, despite the beautiful truth of Genesis 1 and 2, and let me hear you, it's important for you to hear. And this is where I think some versions of Christianity have misrepresented the gospel, where we have over-focused on sin. It is absolutely true that there is part of you that is just beautiful, that is created in the image of God and comes alive when you're being loving, truthful, creative, and responsible. But Genesis 3 tells us there's another side to the story. Can you acknowledge that there are times where you know what love looks like, but you choose a different way? Or you know what it would mean to be creatively responding to the moment in some particular way, but instead you just choose to go with what you did last week because it's easier than having to work out what you do today. Both of those are true to who you are, and that is the tension at the heart of what it means to be a human being. Genesis 3 shows us, and again, I'd love you to consider doing the Foundations course when we start it in May, because we're going to go deeper into this. It's really important for you to understand this. Sin is not only, from a Christian point of view, sin is not only about what happens when you die. Sin, the other side to things, results, as we see in Genesis chapter 3, in brokenness in our relationship with God, brokenness in our relationship with each other. The very first thing that Adam does when he's caught out is blame his wife. And say, she's the problem. Brokenness in our relationship with ourselves. One of the first things we see things, for the first time, we see shame enter the world. And we also see brokenness in the environment. And Christians are called to steward the love of God and call people to a renewed relationship with God, with each other, with themselves, and with the environment. We are called to be agents of God's love and healing and hope at all those four levels. A Christianity that is all about what happens when you die is a watered-down, pale grey imitation of the gospel. It's an incredible truth that we get to live in eternity with Jesus. But there's work for you to do now to be a foretaste of that. And we start to see that story appearing. And we actually, just as we now look at, okay, so that's the first 3 chapters of Genesis. What happens next? I was telling Leanne we're going to get into Genesis, and she was preparing herself for, the next 9 months. What we're going to try and do is cover the rest of Genesis in the next 10 minutes. We'll see how we go. And we see God responding, the tragic story of Cain and Abel and the flood. But then there comes one person. You see, the issue at the heart of the fall we see in Genesis 3 is our decision to prioritize our worldview over the way God sees things. To think that my world is more important than God's world. I will trust myself rather than God. That is still the great temptation of modern people, to trust myself more than I trust God. That's why for me, Proverbs 3, 5 and 6 is so important. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. That is one of the best descriptions of faith I've come across. And so God looks for a person who's willing to trust him more than his own worldview, and he finds Abraham, who is willing to do what seems absolutely ridiculous and willing to lay his son on the altar and exercise and live by faith. And the Bible says, and it's credited to him as righteousness. So God then says, okay, I'm going to use your kids. I'm going to use your offspring. And we have this incredible, you'll see these promises that begin in Genesis chapter 12. And again, this is where, in my view, Israel's got it wrong, in that it's tempting for Israel to focus on itself. Israel was never put on, God's chosen people were never here for themselves. Right, this is the founding documents. This is like the Constitution of Israel. Genesis chapter 12, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I'll curse, and all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you. Israel is here to be a blessing to the world, as we see in the Old Testament. Tim Keller says, Israel was called to be an obedient people, becoming a society that displayed God's glory for the nations to see. And then we see, and again, we'd unpack this more in the Foundations course, the last 50 years through archaeology, we've started to understand what Genesis 15 actually means when we see this fire pot going between the animals, and it's the cutting of the covenant, the enacting of the covenant in Genesis chapter 15. I'd love to spend more time on that. But then we get the renewal of the covenant with Isaac. And what is interesting, as God renews the covenant, he says, through your offspring, All the nations on earth will be blessed because Abraham obeyed me and did everything I required of him. There is this sense that God kind of knew this bunch of people, they're not going to be able to cut it. But there's going to be something that comes through their offspring. And Genesis finishes with this promise of the picture of the one who would come. And as one of the offspring, there is this story as Jacob or Israel blesses all his kids. And he says in Genesis chapter 49, and again, I'm having to skip over miles of Genesis. Wait till we hit Exodus next week. It's going to be even faster. But this profound thing that it's easy to skip over. Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. You are a lion's cub, Judah. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion, he crouches and lies down. Like a lioness, who dares to rouse him? Then look at this. The scepter, or the staff of a king, the symbol of authority, will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations will be his. There is this promise at the end of Genesis that, yep, God has chosen his people, but from his chosen people, from the tribe of Judah, would be the one who has the right to rule over all the nations. And this anointing will be on the tribe of Judah until this person turns up. Any guesses? Well, for many Hebrew people, they would see David as a fulfillment of that promise. And many Bible scholars would see that this is one of those promises where there's a double fulfillment, because it is true that David comes and brings the nation of Israel to a level at which it hasn't been before. But it is also true that all the nations on earth don't come and bow before David. That there is this promise, and it goes on and talks about donkeys and vines and that sort of stuff. And again, one of the things we're going to wait till we get to Revelation later this year. One of the things we have to come to terms with the Bible is it uses these images in a way we wouldn't use an image. It uses pictures and stories in a way we wouldn't use them. And the pictures of the vine and the donkey are a picture of absolute abundance, like the idea that we've got so much stuff that we can tie our livestock up to our grapes, and we don't really care about that. It's kind of the picture there. But also this picture that gets used in Revelation, that somehow this person's going to wash their robes in wine, treading out the winepress. So we'll talk more about that as we come to it. But here in the book of Revelation, we see the reality of the Christian message, the reality of our lives, that there is part of you that is absolutely beautiful. And you need to hear that. That's genuinely who you are. But there's also part of you that's pretty messy. Can you acknowledge that? There's part of you that doesn't have what it takes to feel it all, to be loving all the time, to be truthful all the time. The Christian message is we need help. Any kind of story that says you have to be enough, you have to somehow deal with all your imperfections and have it all together, is a debilitating story, because all of us know that none of us have got it all together, if we're to be honest. Mind you, some of us learn how to play the game, and this is where I think Christianity and we Christians can be dangerous, because we pretend to have it all together sometimes. And we're not real good when it becomes clear that somebody doesn't. Christianity should be a place where it's okay to be real, because the foundational teaching of our Bible is that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And if you know anybody that looks like they're sinless, watch out. They're dangerous. And any kind of church that says it's not okay to not have it together is not a representation of the Church of Jesus Christ. And that's why under human steam, we couldn't find grace on our own. The Old Testament sets up the story, and then Jesus comes as the ultimate answer to the tension that we all live in. And he comes to say, you don't have what it takes, but I love you. And I have come that you might have life and have it to the full. Feel free, if you like, to try your other strategies. Feel free, if you'd like. And there's all kinds of strategies you can apply. You can try and find life through getting fit, or through money, or through food. You can try and find life in all kinds of other places. But wherever you try and find life, it will ultimately let you down unless you find life in and through him alone. He is the only source of life that won't let you down. So we're going to come, as we begin this series, I'm looking forward to travelling through the Old Testament together and see if we can discern the stories Jesus might have told those disciples on the road to Emmaus. And I reckon, my hunch is he starts with the very beginning. And I have no doubt that he then moves his way through and points out to that bit at the end of Genesis. And I bet you they're going, oh yeah. Oh yeah, you're meant to come, eh? I hope we experience it a bit like that. But my prayer is that Sunday mornings aren't just a nice, safe chance to come and be reinforced in my pre-existing ego, but a chance to come to the foot of the cross and be reminded Jesus didn't come to be your mascot. He came to be your path to life. And when he says he is the way, the truth, and the life, he's not saying, I am a nice idea. He's saying, I have come to show you how to do life. The way of life you are to live, as well as the hope of that life. Grace is my favourite word. The heart of the Christian message is you don't have to try hard for God to love you. He doesn't want to let you settle for less than you're capable of being. But his love for you is not contingent on what you do. God loves you. And he institutes this little meal. And calling it a meal is a bit of an overstatement. I'm going to invite the band up as we're going to close and we're going to take communion together. But Jesus knew how we work. He knew how quickly we would fall into the Adam and Eve temptation of trying to order our lives around ourselves. And so on the night he was betrayed, Jesus took a little bit of bread. Unleavened bread. Sorry, this is not bread. If you're at home, you're probably enjoying something that tastes a bit better than what we're enjoying. But this is a symbol. He says, this is my body broken for you. I am the source of your life. Your task isn't to try and organize things so that you can earn your way to heaven. Your task is to be open to the one who carries the scepter from the tribe of Judah, who comes to bring abundance and life in a way that you could barely imagine. The story that began thousands and thousands of years ago finds its fulfillment on the cross. Let's pray. Jesus, as we come, we acknowledge that there is part of us that's messy. There's part of us far from being loving, truthful, creative, and responsible. In our worst moments, we are the exact opposite of all that. But we also know that there is part of us that is beautiful. There is part of us that wants to love people, be creative, responsible, and truthful. Can you help us, Father? Be open to your whole life. And Jesus, thank you that that life is possible in and through your sacrifice on the cross. Let's eat together. As we go into this week, there'll be plenty of times where you're tempted to try and find life in all the wrong places. And my guess is, as you reflect on the last week, there's moments you're not proud of. I encourage you now, just in your mind's eye, to bring those moments to the foot of the cross. And I'm going to just let the band play the first chorus or the first part of this song. And as they do, in your own time, I invite you to take this symbol of Jesus' blood poured out for you. The blood that says you don't have to have it all together. He loves you. And he invites you to the kind of life that is actually life. And then when you're ready, you can stand and join in the song. But I encourage you to take the space you need between you and God. Just to, before you drink the cup, just to bring to him, bring to Jesus the stuff that has been holding you back this week.